Hello and welcome back to another EDH gameplay here on this channel. Before we get into today's game, I want to make a quick shout out for Kaiju Cards in Trier, Germany for providing a great place for us where we can play our TCGs. I can't get enough of my Wayta trainer Prodigy deck, and so I'm trying again to win with some enrage triggers. Robert is new to this channel and is playing Agatha of the Vile Cauldron, which focuses on powering her up to discount activated abilities of his creatures. Anton is back and has brought his Kadena Slinking Sorcerer deck, so be prepared for a lot of morphs and manifested cards, which he'll be flipping over. Ylva is new to his channel and has brought his Kamiz Obscura Oculus deck, which is an as per beatdown list, so I'd say let's jump right into the game. I want to start us off, but Anton announces that he has a pregame action, so he puts a ley line of anticipation onto the battlefield. Then I can go and draw for my turn. I play a land and enchant it with Wild Growth. Afterwards I pass the turn. Robert draws, plays a reveal land, revealing a land and passing the turn. Anton draws for his turn. He plays a fetch land and he passes the turn. Ylva draws, plays a tapped land and passes the turn. In his end step, Anton cracks his fetch land. I untap, I draw for my turn. I play a plains and then I pass the turn. Robert draws, he plays a land and passes the turn. Anton untaps, he draws, he plays another land, taking 2 damage, and then he passes. In his end step, I tap 3 mana to flash in a Mithril Code. Then we go to Ylva's turn, he untaps, he draws, he plays another land, and passes the turn. So I untap, I draw for my turn, I play another land, then I tap a total of 4 mana to cast Knave of the Dire Hunt. Afterwards I pass the turn, so Robert draws, he plays a land, then he taps a total of 3 mana to cast Svellar Ice Shaper, and then he passes the turn. In his end step, Anton flashes in Trail of Mystery, and there will be a lot of triggers from this card. Anton draws, he plays a land, and passes the turn. Ylva draws, he plays a land, and passes the turn. I untap, I draw for my turn. I move to combat and Knave triggers, I pay for her ability to double her power, and now she must be blocked. I attack Robert, and now he is forced to block. Svellar dies. Knave triggers, so I draw a card. I play a land in my second main and then I pass the turn. Robert draws, he untaps, he plays a land for turn, and he pays 3 mana to cast a Hound Tamer. Afterwards he wants to pass the turn, but Anton flashes in a Scroll of Fate. He immediately uses it to manifest a card from his hand. That triggers his trail, so he finds a basic land to hand. Finds it and goes to his turn. He untaps, draws for his turn, he plays a land and says go. Ylva draws, he plays a tapped land, and then he taps a total of 3 mana to cast a Chasm Skulker. Afterwards he passes the turn, so I untap and draw. I play a land for turn, and then I attempt to cast a Bronzebeak Foragers. On cast, Anton uses his Scroll to manifest a card from his hand. That triggers his trail, so he finds a basic land to hand. Afterwards he taps 2 mana to cast Secret Plans. In addition to that, he manifests the card he just put into play and flips a Void Mage Apprentice, countering my Bronzebeak Foragers. My spell is countered, then I move to combat and Knave attacks Anton. He takes it, and I pass the turn. Robert untaps, draws for his turn. He moves to combat and attacks Anton for free. Anton takes it, and in his second main, Robert casts his commander Agatha. He uses his Forge of Heroes to put a +1/+1 counter on her. He passes, so Anton untaps and draws. He plays a land for turn and says go. Ylva untaps, draws for turn. Chasm Skulker gets a counter. He plays a land and taps a total of 4 mana to cast his commander Kamiz. Afterwards he moves to combat, and Skulker attacks Anton. On attack he connives, draws a card, discards a card, and so Chasm Skulker gets a total of 2 +1/+1 counters. He passes, so I untap and draw. I float 2 green mana, and with one of them I cast Bushwhack, finding a forest to my hand. I play it as land for turn, and then I tap an additional 3 mana to cast a Forerunner of the Empire, finding Ranging Raptors on top of my library. Afterwards I move to combat and attack Anton for free with Knave. In response, he flashes in his commander Kadena, and then he uses his scroll to manifest a card from his hand. With the trigger on the stack, I path to exile his commander, so he finds another basic. After that, the manifest resolves, that triggers his trail, so he finds another basic to hand, and then he jump blocks with his manifested card, that triggers knave, so I draw a card. I then pass the turn, so Robert untaps, draws for his turn, he moves to combat and attacks Anton for free. Anton takes it, and then he passes the turn. Anton untaps and draws, he plays a land, and says go. Ylva untaps and draws, he plays a land for turn, and he declares an attack on me. His commander triggers, makes his creature unblockable, and he connives. And before damage he ninjutsus in a Silent Blade Oni. I take a total of 6 damage, and now he's allowed to cast a spell from my hand. He casts my Rhythm of the Wild, and then he passes the turn. So I untap, I draw for my turn. I tap 3 mana to cast my commander Wayta Trainer Prodigy. Afterwards I float 2 green, and add 2 more mana to cast Ranging Raptors. They enter, so Forerunner of the Empire deals 1 damage to each creature. That triggers my Ranging Raptors twice, so I find 2 basics. Afterwards I have 1 green floating, and my Ranging Raptors fight my commander. That triggers them again, so I find 2 more basics. And afterwards I move to combat and I attack Anton for free with Knave. He takes it, and in my end step, Robert uses his activated ability of his Hound Tamer to give Agatha 1+1/+1 counter. Due to the discount he's able to do it 2 more times, so she gets a total of 3 +1/+1 counters. We then go to his turn, he untaps, he draws, he plays a land for turn, he moves to combat and Hound Tamer attacks me and Agatha attacks Anton. Anton taps 3 mana to cast an Semblance Anvil, imprinting a creature card. He then taps 4 mana to cast his commander Kadena. She enters and he uses his Scroll of Fate to manifest a card from his hand. He does, that triggers his trail, so he finds another basic to hand, and he draws a card from Kadena. He jump blocks with the manifested card and I jump block with my Ranging Raptors, so I get 2 more Enrage triggers. Afterwards, Robert taps a total of 5 mana to cast Vorinclex. On ETB he finds 2 forests to his hand, and afterwards he passes the turn, so Anton untaps, he draws for his turn, he plays a land, then he taps 2 mana to cast Demonic Tutor. He finds a card to his hand, plays his first free morph in this game, that triggers his trail, so he finds another basic to hand and draws a card from Kadena. He taps 2 more mana to flip his morph, which is a Den Protector, and that one brings back his Demonic Tutor. He draws a card from Secret Plans, and then he manifests a card from his hand, triggering Trail and Kadena. So he finds a basic and draws a card. He taps 3 mana to cast Seedborn Muse. He passes, so Ylva and Anton go to their untap. Ylva draws, he plays a land, and then he attacks Anton with his Oni. Kamiz trigger is on the stack, and then Anton uses his flash mechanic to flash in Demonic Tutor, finding a card to his hand. He then uses his Scroll of Fate to manifest a card from his hand, playing a card, triggering his Trail and Kadena. Then the Connive trigger resolves, and Oni gets a counter and Anton takes a total of 7 damage. Ylva gets to cast his Timur Sabertooth, and then he taps a total of 5 mana to cast Nightmare Unmaking, exiling creatures with power 4 or less. With Nightmare Unmaking on the stack, Anton flips one of his morph creatures, which is a Brine Elemental, so we all don't have another untap step. He draws from Secret Plans, and then Ylva activates his Timur Sabertooth, bouncing Kamiz to his hand. Then Brine Elemental and Nightmare Unmaking resolve. Ylva passes the turn, so I draw, and I pass. Robert draws, he plays a tapped land, and then he attacks Anton with his Vorinclex. Anton takes 6, then he passes the turn. Anton untaps and draws, he plays a land, and he recasts his commander Kadena. He plays a free morph, triggering his trail, finding another basic to hand, he draws a card, he uses his scroll to manifest a card, triggering his trail, finding another basic to hand, drawing a card, and then passing the turn. Ylva draws, he plays a land, and then he wants to pass the turn, but Anton still flips one of his morphs, getting a land and drawing a card from his plans. I untap, I draw for my turn, tap a total of 5 mana to recast my commander Wayta Trainer Prodigy, and I tap another 5 mana to cast Wrathful Raptors. Afterwards I pay 3 mana to equip my Mithril Coat to my commander, then I pass the turn. Robert untaps, he draws for his turn, He plays a land, shocking it in, and then Vorinclex attacks Anton. He blocks with one of his morphs and takes a total of 3 damage. Robert taps a total of 3 mana to cast Flame Wave Invoker and another 1 mana to cast Wayfarer's Bauble. In his end step, Anton flashes in a Soaring and taps even more mana to cast a Notion Thief. With Notion Thief on the stack, Robert shoots him out with Flame Wave Invoker. Ylva is next in turn order and untaps. He draws for his turn. He plays a land. He taps a total of 5 mana to cast Rid of Return, imprinting it on his Oni and bringing back Sun Titan. Sun Titan brings back his Chasm Skulker. Then he taps even more mana to cast his commander Kamiz. He moves to combat and Oni attacks me. He connives on attack and makes the Oni unblockable. It connects, so I take a total of 8 damage. He brings back Oscar due to the Rid trigger, and he steals my Paleontologist due to the Oni trigger. He passes, so I untap and draw. I play a land for turn. I pay a total of 3 mana to equip my Mithril Coat to my Wrathful Raptors. Then I tap 4 mana to cast Gimli's Reckless Might, and I pass the turn. Robert untaps and draws. He taps a total of 6 mana to cast Rishkar's Expertise, so he draws a total of 6 cards. And he is allowed to cast a spell for free, which is Return of the Wild Speaker, drawing 6 additional cards. Afterwards he plays a land and passes the turn. Ylva untaps and draws. He plays a land. He taps a total of 6 mana to cast Austere Command, naming artifacts and enchantments. All of them are destroyed. I will catch my Wild Growth in a minute. And then he taps even more mana to cast Reconnaissance Mission. He moves to attacks and Oni attacks me and Sun Titan attacks Robert. He connives on attack, makes the Oni unblockable and Sun Titan gets double strike. He brings back a land due to the Sun Titan trigger and we both take our damage. He has 3 card draw triggers from the mission and he uses his last remaining mana to cast Soaring. He passes the turn and in his end step I tap my commander so that my Wrathful Raptors fight his Oni, so that I ping Ylva for a total of 16 damage. I untap, draw for my turn, and I pass the turn. Robert quickly casts a Vastwood Fortification, giving Agatha another counter, and then he goes to his turn. He draws for turn, plays a land and wants to pass. In his end step, Ylva uses my Paleontologist to exile my Bronzebeak Foragers, and in his end step I use my commander and fight the Oni again with my Wrathful Raptors, pinging Ylva for another 16. Then we go to his turn. He draws for turn, he plays a land, he taps a total of 4 mana to cast the Bronzebeak Foragers, he targets my Mithril Coat and Robert's Flame Weaver. Robert responds by casting an Inscription of Abundance, so Vorinclex fights my Raptors, and Ylva taps a total of 4 mana to cast Other End, targeting my Raptors. I cast Deflecting Sword. I change the target of Other End to Ylva's Oni, so everything resolves. Inscription fight happens, so I have 2 Wrathful Raptors triggers. I ping Ylva for 6 and Robert for 6, and still with Bronzebeak Foragers on the stack. Robert taps a total of 2 mana to cast Tyver's Stand for 1, giving Agatha +1/+1 attacks proof, and now with even more discount he use Flame Wave Invoker to ping out Ylva. I untap and draw. I move to combat and my Wrathful Raptors attack Robert. He blocks with his Flame Weaver, and so I have 2 more Wrathful Raptors triggers, and due to the trample he goes down to 10. I want to pass the turn, and in my end step he flashes in a Guardian Augmenter, and with that on a stack my Wrathful Raptors fight Vorinclex, and so I ping Robert out of the game. Alright everybody, this was another super exciting game for all of us. When it comes to the card of the game, I definitely have to mention Trail of Mystery. This card especially shines when you are able to bring it out really early and then constantly profit from it. Even though we missed the second line of the card all the time, we still asked Anton to count how many basic lands he found with it, and his response was all of them. So if you want to play a morph deck, you should consider playing this card to secure land drops. Alright guys, I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Let me know down in the comments below what you think about it, and then I would say see you at the next one. Goodbye guys.